Okay, well, it's good to see everyone. This is our first Career Connections. I'm Zach. I'm one of the tutors with the Park University Academic Success Center. I also get to help with doing resume and cover letter appointments, which is a lot of fun. And I'm joined today by Rollens Kripe. She's the talent acquisition partner for Meritas Health. She's been in this role for about 3 years, and her journey as a recruiter started with Meritas. She graduated from Northwest Missouri State University in 2018 with a bachelor's in psychology with a minor in business. And she's been working closely with our university for the last year through our Medical Assistant Academy. She's really passionate about resume writing, and she's excited to be with us today to share some tips and tricks to help students as they enter the workforce. So with that being said, I'll pass it off to Rollins.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Zach. Okay, let me get my screen all shared with you guys. Okay, there we go. All right. So get it to where it's gonna go. But like Zach said, so I am the talent acquisition partner over here at Meritas. And I took a class when I was in college, and we went over resume tips and tricks, resume writing. So it's just something that's always really interested me. So that's what I decided to talk to you guys about today. So are you able to see my PowerPoint? Perfect. Okay, cool. So that's what we're going to talk about today is just a few different ways to write your resume, ways to make it stick out, and things that you should include on a resume and shouldn't. So again, we're going to go over a little bit about what a resume is, go over the content of a resume, again, what to include, what not to include, and then just recommendations that I have that I would recommend using on your resume. Um, so again, resume defined. So this is basically going to be a personal fact sheet. It is a very brief overview of your educational and professional qualifications and experiences. So that being said, it doesn't need to be a fully comprehensive look at every single thing that you've ever done. However, sometimes we recommend that. It just kind of depends. But employers do typically spend less than a minute each reviewing an applicant's resume before deciding whether or not to proceed. So making your resume stand out is the best way to get you hired and get you noticed. And so in many cases, this is the only information that a prospective employer can see about you. But also most of the time it is the first information and the first interaction that they have with you. So the more professional you can appear, the more you can stand out, the better off you are. And just be very clear and very succinct. So again, contents of a resume. So a little bit about that is I recommend, so we've got sections of a resume. We've got header, we've got education, professional affiliations, professional experience, honors and awards, and then community involvement. Now, do you have to include all of these? No, you don't have to. You can. The ones I would recommend specifically are your header, education, and professional experience. The others, and professional affiliations, if you have any. Honors and awards, those are nice. But if you don't have any, it's not something that is pertinent to keep on your resume. And same with community involvement. It's always nice to have, but it is not something that I would say is required. And it's something that I do look at, but when I am going through resumes, those the first four that I mentioned are the ones that I look at closer. Um, again, these are just the standard sections. Most of the common sections, like I said, are the header, heading, education, and the professional experience. So to kind of go over each specific one. So your header needs to be clear. It needs to be eye-catching. This is a great example that we use up here at the top. It says exactly person's name. It says first, last name, says where they're located, has a phone number, and it has the title that they are. So current contact information is most important. I have seen resumes sometimes where maybe the phone number is out of service, and then that sometimes means that you don't get a call, and that really stinks. So I recommend making sure that when you apply to places that those are all of your information on your resume is accurate and up to date. Your name also is accurate and up to date. clearly. But when it comes to email address, I highly, highly, highly recommend making sure that you have a professional email address. So, like for example, my personal email address that I have is my first name, my last name, and then at Gmail. Pretty basic, pretty easy. But I've seen resumes, or not resumes, excuse me, applications and emails where they have things like live, laugh, love at gmail.com or hot mama 123 at Yahoo. And it's, that is, as funny as that is, it is probably not the best first impression. So I would definitely have an email that you use for all applications, all resumes, everything like that, that is as clear cut and as professional as possible. I know, like, for example, I have a very interesting name. So my name does not get taken a lot by emails, but if you have something, say, like John Smith, I would do the best you can, come up with some numbers at the end of it. But maybe stay away from, again, things like Hot Mama or Surfer Dude or something like that. So, and then when you come time to put your location and your address on there, I would keep it to just city and state. Your full address is not always necessary. And in fact, sometimes if you put your resume on LinkedIn, I highly recommend that you don't include your full address just because you lose the digital trail. And then when it comes to resume content, education. So for that, just include your school name. So again, I'm going to use a personal example. I graduated from Northwest Missouri State. So I would put Northwest Missouri State. I would put what my degree was in, which was psychology. So I'd do Bachelor of Science in Psychology. And then if it is currently in progress, you can say that. You can say that you started this in, say it's in 2020 and your projected graduation date is 2025. You can put that on your resume. I was always advised to, if you wanted to put your GPA on there, you are welcome to. However, I would only put it on there if it is a 3.5 or higher. Again, it is not required. I don't look at this, but if you are something that you're proud of, you are welcome to include it. I just would not include it unless it is that 3.5 or higher. And then professional affiliation. So membership to a professional organization, the office you held current or in the past, certification, date obtained, and the expiration. So if you are applying for some sort of clinical position, for example, so if you are studying to be an RN, including your BSN on there, including your RN certification, your RN license, including your BLS and any other certifications that you have received, like CPR, ACLS, anything like that. Highly recommend that it being on there. That is something that I actively search for and I actively look at when we are looking at resumes. It makes my job a lot easier, knowing that if I need to go check somebody's certification, I've got the number right there on their resume and we can just do a quick lookup and we're like, okay, perfect, they're certified, great, good to go. So I highly recommend making sure that that is included on there. Yeah. Professional experience. So what to include? I would include the company name, the city and state in which that company was located. So if it's a remote position, you can say remote and then say the state and the city that they are operated out of. And then your job title. And then dates of employment. I would say for your dates of employment, if you don't know the exact date that you started, a month is good. So if you say like May 2018 through April of 2023, that's fine. It doesn't need to be like May 1st, 2018 through April 2nd. It doesn't need to get that specific. Uh, and then key results and accomplishments. So anything that you are really proud of that you did while at that position. So say you implemented a new software while you were working there. That's a really big thing that I would include on that. Any responsibilities that you held and tasks completed. So this goes into my next slide, which talks about how to include these things. So using bullet points, making sure that you start each line with an action verb and making sure that whatever action verb that you decide on, that you are keeping that tense throughout the entirety of that section of your, like the entirety of that bullet point section. So say I'm talking about I was a hot dog salesman for the Royals or something like that, just off the cuff. And I was going to talk about that in the present tense. I would use that for all of the bullet points underneath that. Once I went to a next job, I would change the tense if I needed to. So just make sure that you're keeping that tense accurate and the same throughout that whole section. Um, Use your present tense for your current positions and your past tense for your previous positions. Try not to start your bullet points with the same action verb, trying to really kind of shake it up, using a thesaurus to adjust it. So instead of saying implemented XYZ, making sure that you can use that word 100%, but making sure that if you've used it once, you don't use it again. Um, Really tailoring your skills to that position. So again, if we're talking about somebody who is applying for an RN position, making sure that the uh, skills that you're listing, the experience that you're listing underneath each professional experience is tailored to what you're applying for. So, for example, if you are wanting to work in, let's just say, pediatrics, and you worked at let's just say you worked at a school or a daycare, really tailoring what you are saying in those bullet points to kind of highlight your experience with children and highlighting exactly like why you enjoyed it and what you enjoyed about it and things that you accomplished while you were there would be a really big plus and would be something that would make you stand out really well. Be concise, but be thorough. So I would say maximum on each bullet point, a sentence. Don't make it to where it's a run-on sentence and it's too crazy long. Maybe make it about, I don't know what a good length would be, but I would just keep it about a sentence and don't drone on and on. Keep it to where you're not feeling like you're explaining yourself multiple times. Just keep it short, keep it sweet, keep it concise, but still make sure that you're being as thorough as possible. Honors and awards. So keep these professional or educational. I would recommend not using religious or political awards unless they are directly related to your desired career. So if you received something from a religious organization and are going into something, say you're going into working for like the church administration or something like that, that would be something to include. But say you are going to work for like a school or something like that, that may be something that you don't necessarily need to include on there. List by most applicable. So that's kind of exactly what I said. So if you are going to school to be, I'm going to use my RN example again. If you're going to go to school to be an RN, you don't necessarily need to include like I won a dance battle in 2018. That doesn't necessarily need to be on there. So, but if you won like a Daisy Award or something like that, that would be amazing for you to include. We would love to see that. Um, Community involvement. So any volunteer work, any board membership that you held, again, avoid the religious and political involvement if at all possible, unless it's related to your desired career. So any community involvement that you've done that you're particularly proud of, if you're on the board of something, if you maybe held a title or held a position on a board or just a team, that would be a great thing to include as well. Accurate contact information. I know I touched on this a little bit there at the beginning, but make sure when you are submitting your resume, you are submitting it with the most accurate and up-to-date contact information that you have. I typically, if I'm going to call somebody, I will click on their resume first, and that is the number that I call. And sometimes if that number is not accurate or it's out of service, then it's one of those things where maybe they'll contact me a couple weeks later and be like, why didn't you call me? And I'm like, I did, so just making sure that you have the most accurate and up-to-date information could be the difference between you getting a position versus you not. Any work-related information. So again, everything that we kind of discussed previously. So making sure that everything that you're including on your resume is relevant to what you're applying for. And then professional or educational honors and awards. Again, just making sure that that is related to what you're applying for and it's not, again, a dance battle that you won in 2018. What not to include. So this is a big one. I highly recommend not including any sort of photos of yourself. I think that that is something that there was a little bit of a trend for a while where that was something that people were doing. They were including photos of themselves, and I highly recommend not doing that. I would say that sometime if you include a photo, you just kind of open yourself up to different things, and it's just a little bit easier for, as a recruiter personally, to be as unbiased as possible if I don't have a photo of you sitting in front of me, smiling, looking gorgeous. But it's a little bit easier to say, okay, let me look at this person's qualifications specifically and just go based off of what I see on the paper. Um, and I think that would be the same for any recruiter that you would speak with. Again, political and religious affiliations, unless it's irrelevant to what you are applying for, I would keep those off. Again, it just opens you up to a little bit more biased if you do include it. Because say you get somebody that is reading your resume who is like, I am a very die-hard Catholic or something like that, and you say that you're not, they may have that what's the word I'm looking for? They may have that bias, and I just think that that's something that you can just leave off, and it would be a lot easier, and it would be highlight your work history as opposed to kind of your experience outside of the work or workforce. Hobbies. They don't need to know that you like long walks on the beach, or that you take flamingo and dancing in your spare time. Just keeping that off of there. Again, keep anything on there that's related to work or anything that you're doing. If you're applying to be a dance teacher, yeah, of course, put that your hobbies are flamingo dancing. But if you're applying for, again, like an RN role, you don't need to include that. Your graduation years. Yeah, it depends. You don't have to necessarily do that. You can if you want. This is kind of one that I would say is optional. I would say if you put it on there, there may be times where you're kind of opening yourself up to again that bias, but if you don't include it, then that's also okay. So it's really up to you, whatever you choose to do. That's something that I would say is a little bit more personal preference. And then family details. I had somebody one time who listed out the age of every single child they had, and the age of their wife, and the age of their dog, their cat, and well, that's all great and congratulations. That's not necessarily something that I, as a recruiter, need to know. So keeping that off of there again would make it a lot easier to just look at the paper and say, is this person qualified or are they not? Recommendations. So I would definitely use your action verbs, use the correct tense like we spoke about a few slides ago, making sure that all your verbs are the same, making sure that you are using different ones per each bullet point. So making it as variable as possible. Um, Using bullet points, using short, concise sentences, not paragraphs. A lot of times your resume is just going to be that first impression of you. And if you want to get more specific, you can do that in the interview. So a paragraph is not always necessary. Using facts and data, that would be great. So if you say you worked on a sales team and you increased their productivity by 150%, that's something amazing to include because that's an actual number that we can look at and be like, wow, that's a lot. Uh, Limit it to one page if necessary. You can go up to two. I think anything more than two is, again, not my personal preference, and a lot of recruiters would probably feel the same way and will feel the same way. There are times where if you're a clinical person, they sometimes will have one page that's just like their work history, and then they'll have another page that's their clinical experience, and that's okay. Um, but when it comes to including your professional experience, try to include the most relevant or the most recent. So if I was going to fill out my resume right now, if I were going to go update it, I'd probably take off my barista job that I had in college because that's not recent and it's not as relevant to what I would be applying for potentially. And then again, tailor your resume. So using keyword searches. So example, if you're searching something for something within the medical field, again, like we spoke about, tailoring your resume to that experience. For example, using pediatrics, including that pediatrics language in your resume. So maybe you worked in the pediatric ICU, including like PICU, including pediatric ICU, including that verbiage in your resume is going to be something that'll really make you stand out. And it will also really help if I, for example, were to go on Indeed and search, like, I want somebody who has XYZ amount of pediatrics experience, your resume might pop up as opposed to if you had not included that. And then again, don't include. So just little wrap up of all of that. Don't include personal information like your photo, height, weight, age, date of birth. your gender, your marital status, your likes and your hobbies. These are all things that, once you are hired on, we can get to know you that way, but it's not something that I need to see in a resume, because I'm really just trying to see if you're qualified and a good fit for the job. And that doesn't necessarily mean I need to know how tall you are. And same with the photo and the age and the sex and gender and marital status. Sometimes that can open you up to those biases, and it may make the recruiter's job a lot harder, to make sure that they're remaining as unbiased as possible and just looking at your qualifications. So it's a little bit easier, and it also will open you up to a little bit more opportunities if you do include less of these things. Um, so all that being said, that was just a very brief overview of things that I would include on a resume versus what I wouldn't, sections of a resume and different aspects of that. Does anybody have any questions, anything that I can answer?
I'll take a question if you don't mind. So I feel as somebody who's been submitting kind of a lot of resumes in the last 6 months or so, what do you think is the key of getting that resume in front of a real person? Some of these larger organizations use these softwares to manage applicants and their resumes, and sometimes it feels like it doesn't go much further than that.
Mhm.
Um,
That's fair.
yeah, do you have any kind of suggestions about making it past that first hurdle?
That is a great question. So one thing that I would say is making sure that while your resume, if it were to stand out, making sure that it's also still clear and concise. So for example, we kind of talked about this towards the beginning where we had like an example of a header, and that header is very clear. It is very clean. It's easy to read. It's easy to understand what is on it. I just pull it back up. But making it so where that it still stands out and the name stands out. I think that for me, when I go to look at resumes, if it kind of just looks like a jumble of bullet points, tend that one tends to be a little bit of a quicker read for me than if it were to be a little bit more cleaner and a little bit more clear exactly what is on the resume. I think that making sure that when you are applying and maybe you're filling out an application, that the information that you're filling out on the application matches what's on the resume as well. So making sure that that is all accurate and up to date, and making sure that you are using the same language throughout. I think one thing that I've noticed, again, like I said, if your resume is a little too loud, that may be something that I personally may pass up on, as opposed to somebody who has a resume that's a little bit more cleaner, a little bit more succinct. So you kind of got to find that balance, but at the same time, making sure that your resume stands out. So I would say making sure that it is clear, it is clean. Your name is right there up at the top. All of the information is accurate. I think that that would be the best way to get that in front of people. I think just making sure that yeah, making sure it's clean and clear. I think that's the best way to go about it.
Thank you.
Awesome. Does anyone else have any other questions at all? You can post in the chat if you have any.
Yeah, so I actually have a question about applying skills to your resume. What's the importance of including hard and soft skills? Like, what's the balance between those two?
So that's a good question. When it comes to skills, I actually was editing a resume for my brother the other day, who is about to enter the workforce. He's about to graduate. And we were talking about that because he has been working in a lab for 2 or 3 years, and he was like, what skills do I need to include? And I would say it depends on your job search. It depends on the position that you're applying for. If you were applying for an RN position, using those skills and saying, I did phlebotomy, I did stitches, I did sutures, I worked in surgery, I did pediatrics, including all of that is extremely important. But if you're talking about like, I know how to change a IV or something like that. Those are things that maybe you don't necessarily need to include on there, because if you have your nursing degree, that's something that should be kind of not common sense, but like if you got your degree, that should be something that you know. So when it comes to skills, I would make sure to tailor those to things that are accurate and more relevant to what you're applying for. So again, I'm gonna use my brother as an example. I was working on his resume. He worked in a lab. He worked with a very, very, very specific type of stethoscope that if you asked me the name of it, I couldn't tell you. But I was like, you should probably put that on there because that's going to be something that those employers will really like to see because you worked with that and because it's so so what's the word I'm looking for? So different, and that's not always something that you would come across in his field of study that he's doing. He's a chemical engineer, and I'm like, you're way smarter than me, so good for you. But that's something I would definitely say when it comes to skills, focus on the ones that are relevant to the position and that will really make you stand out. If you have a degree in something, you don't necessarily need to include all the things that you learned in that degree. But if you are applying for something, again, in pediatrics, maybe include that you worked with kids, you have your child CPR license, something like that.
Thank you. That was really enlightening.
Good.
Awesome, thank you. I have a small question before we close
course.
this out. So on some of the resumes that I've seen from students or alumni, they'll include an objective statement or a professional summary, and it'd be right below their header. Do you feel like that's important to include on a resume?
You can, I think that's one of those things that I feel is optional. I think you could definitely include it, and especially when you are tailoring your resume to the positions you're applying for, tailor that objective statement as well. So if you're leaving you're coming out of college and you're searching for a position, and say you're casting a wide net, and you're saying, I know that I want to do something in, I'm going to use human resources. I'm going to do something in human resources, but I don't know what. But you're applying for, say, like a recruiting position, maybe an HR generalist, you're applying for a benefit specialist, tailoring that subject or that message there at the top to that position you're applying for would be really important. So saying, I would like to obtain a position in some sort of HR department in a recruiting role by doing this XYZ. I don't necessarily think that if you're doing something super specific, so say you're, again, I'm going to use my RN example. If you're going to be an RN, that's not as important. But I think if you're doing something where you're casting a wide net or you're trying to get your resume really out there and really noticed, I would make sure to include that and tailor it to the position that you're applying to. One recommendation I got from a professor who did a resume writing class, it was, again, super enlightening. It was really crazy. I've never thought about my resume so much in my life. Was when you save your resume, one thing she always told us to do is to save it with your first name, your last name, and then the position you're applying for. So, for example, I would do Rollens Kripe, talent acquisition partner, resume. This is because sometimes people will submit it and it'll just say like resume first draft. And, that's the first thing I see. It's kind of like, oh, okay, well, I know that they're submitting it to a lot of places. And again, I completely understand that, but it makes your resume stand out a little bit more if you're saving it under a different title each time. And I know that that can get annoying, but I will tell you that it does make a difference. But back to that objective statement, I think making sure that if you do include it, to tailor it to what you're applying to, don't just leave it the same. So if you're applying to, say, an HR role and you're like, I want to do this, this, and this, changing it to where it's related to that HR statement versus if you're going to apply to a teacher role, the putting HR in there is not going to really do anything, if that makes sense.
Awesome. Well, thank you for answering our, did we have one more question?
Yes, I do have a question. Please, in the presentation, she made mention of not including our full address on our resume. So let's say I say in Overland Park, I see an opening that is closer to my place. What do I need to put to let the person know that, hey, this lady stays closer, so recruiting her will be a plus for me? Because he says I should include all my address. So what should I put there and what should I not put there? Thank you.
Okay, and if I misunderstood your question, please feel free to clarify and correct me. I think it cut out there for a brief moment, so I apologize. When it comes to your full address, I would not include that. Definitely, like if I'm gonna put my address on there, I live at 123 Berry Road, Kansas City, Missouri, 64154. I would make sure to just include the Kansas City, Missouri. That's it. It doesn't need to be anything crazy. It doesn't even need to be the area code. Sometimes that part is helpful. So like for our purposes, our clinics are located throughout the Northland of Kansas City. So if I know that you live in, let's just say if I know that you live in Excelsior Springs, that may be a little bit of a drive for you to our clinics. And if that's something that you're okay with, amazing. But that might be something that we would need to talk about during our interview. So making sure that you just put the city that you live in and the state that you live in, I think that's really all you need. If you are maybe being like an international student or something to that effect. You can also include like your home country. You can include your home city, your home state, things like that. That's perfectly fine as well. Or you can include where you are located right now. So again, if you are a international student and you currently reside on the Park University campus, I think you just need to include that you live in Parkville, Missouri right now. And that's perfectly fine. I think that's really all you need to include. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Of course.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing your expertise with us and for this presentation tonight. We really appreciate it. I also want to thank North Kansas City Hospital. And then for everyone that's watching, we will have another Career Connections event. It will be Thursday, April 25th at 5 p.m. Central Time. And the topic will be networking. So again, thanks everyone. If you're a student or alumni, you're welcome to come to the library or the Academic Success Center. We've got folks that can help you with your resumes, cover letters, interview preparation. And then if you're on LinkedIn, you can also follow the Park University page. So thanks everyone. I hope that you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.